I was about to say good morning, and then I wasn't sure if it was morning anymore. I think we've passed over morning. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back to the continued AWP 2026 Conference and Book Fair here in Baltimore. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Travis Krowski. I'm a member of the AWP Board of Directors, and I'm also a member of AWP. I've been a member of AWP since I was a graduate student at the Center for Writers at Southern Mississippi, where one of my cherished mentors, Stephen Barthelme, was my professor of fiction, and I was first introduced to Red Hen Press when they published his collection. It's incredible press, incredible people, and if you haven't checked out their work, I encourage you to do so. The Association of Writers and Writing Programs is a small but mighty nonprofit that amplifies the voices of writers and the academic programs and organizations that serve them. That's basically our mission if you check it out online, all while championing diversity and excellence in creative writing. I'm the chair of the AWP Board of Directors, and first and foremost, though, I'm a member of AWP. I've been a member for 16 years now, but it wasn't until I began serving on the Board of Directors that I understood just how small, very small in number, and absolutely dedicated are the AWP staff. It's continually inspiring, and on top of our member community, and on top of events just like this one, it's their work as a staff that keeps me volunteering my time and donating monthly to AWP to keep the conference going and support young writers and make this accessible and affordable to everybody. We are delighted to bring you this event today and like to acknowledge and thank Red Hen Press for today's event and their sponsor of the conference. Our literary partners like this one and sponsors allow AWP to present these extraordinary literary events and help us keep our conference. Just two quick reminders before the event, and I'll turn it over to Red Hen Press and Kate. Please respect seats marked as reserved and for accessibility guests. Please give these authors about 10 minutes to get to the table right out to the left there before coming up for book signing, which I hope you do. And if you want a book, it's a little bit past the left down to the Ivy Bookstore table down there. Okay, that's it. Thank you. And it's my great pleasure and honor to welcome Kate Gale, who will introduce and run this fantastic event.
So I also started attending AWP a long time ago, and actually my second AWP was in Baltimore. Red Hen was what we would now call a micro press at that time. We were only publishing a few books, and we were mostly publishing poetry, and I was finishing a PhD in poetry and writing a dissertation on African American poetry. And I thought we would just publish for a little while and then probably close down, because most presses did close down, certainly on the West Coast. But I thought, we were just messing around. And we came to AWP. We had been in New Orleans, and it seemed kind of fun. And then we came to AWP in Baltimore. And there were only two of us working our tiny table, and we had a few books there. And I was standing there, and Lucille Clifton came over to the table, and she was one of the poets I was writing my dissertation on. And I recognized her right away because she was Lucille Clifton. And she said, "I really like the poets that you're publishing." And I said to myself, we might keep going. And it was just kind of a turning point for me, because I thought, I'd grown up in a cult. I had lived in my car. I had started college at a small black college in Virginia, a community college. I had wandered out to Arizona and then to California. I never thought I would do anything with my life. But there I was talking with Lucille Clifton, and she thought something we were doing mattered. And it was one of the first times in my life that anyone thought I was doing something that mattered. And it was here in Baltimore. And I've never forgotten it. And I think it's a good thing to have a moment in your life when you're doing something that matters. I want to read you a poem by one of our poets, Bryn Sato, from her book, her first book with Red Hen. We've done a few books with her, and it's called Palace of Contemplating Departure. And somehow this poem always feels like it sums up for me myself driving out to the West Coast and then feeling brave enough to start a press, which has turned out to be foolish in so many ways. The Palace of Contemplating Departure. You wandered through my life like a backwards wish. When I was ready for deliverance, I was ready for release. Like a pinball in God's mouth, like charanga on Tuesdays, like the summer in Shanghai when we prayed for a rainstorm, bartered our shame, tore open oranges with 4 dirty thumbs. The forecast said super, so we chartered a yacht and we planted a garden on the unbending prow. But the sea said surrender with its arms full of salt, and wind shook the seeds from our shirt coat pockets. So when we washed up on the shoreline of sunlight near the city of wind, we were broken and thin, like wraiths at a wake. But you tilted your head up and told me I was wild, so I lifted my life and I lifted your life. And we wandered through the gate of radiant days. Then we married our splendor in the hall of bright rule. I thank you again. You gave madness a chance, and you lassoed the morning, and we met on a Tuesday in a dance hall in Shanghai. And I left you in a leap year for the coveted shoreline, and you wept like a book when it's pulled from a well. But you were the one who told me I was wild, and you were the one who wrestled the angel. And I knew when I left you that courage was a choice and memory a spear, and the X of destination is etched on my iris, and it shifts with the seasons. Don't think of the phoenix, think of the mountain. But where will I go now with my tireless wonder? And when will I again be brave like that? So I think of that every day because continuing to work in publishing feels like an act of madness and an act of bravery. So thank you all for being here today. What we're here to have a conversation about is writing the dark that is America. And it is dark. It is dark right now. All of the writers that are here today are writing in some sort of a dark or spec fiction or dystopian space. And that's a space that we're leaning hard into at Red Hen. And so I'd like each of them to introduce themselves and to say a little bit about what it's like to lean into this spec fiction or dystopian space that they're into in their book, and maybe to start with this idea of what was the big takeaway that they wanted readers to have when they read their books. We've got one writer whose book is about to come out later this year, and one whose book is just about to come out, and then Lara, whose book has come out. So we've got a few different stages here. But we're going to start with you, Lara. And again, you know, what was your big takeaway? And if you could introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your book. Thank you all so much for being here today.
Thank you, Kate, and thank you all for being here and for having us. Hi, I'm Lara Ehrlich, and this is the book, Bind Me Tighter Still, which is about a siren who is restless in the sea and gives up her tail for life on land. So far, that might sound familiar, but it quickly departs from the fairy tale. She has a daughter and realizes she's just as restless on land as she was in the sea. And they flee to the ocean where she starts a mermaid burlesque. So, yes, a roadside attraction that becomes a kingdom of women who perform and sort of use the male gaze against men to create a powerful kingdom where women can be safe and empowered. Her daughter at 15 begins pushing back against that world and her place in it, and things sort of fall apart from there a little bit. So the seed of this book, I began writing this book in 2016, which, as we all remember, perhaps there was a presidential election in 2016. I had also just had my daughter. So I was thinking a lot about raising a girl, or any child really, but especially maybe a daughter, in the world that we found ourselves in 2016, and unfortunately continue to find ourselves in. So thinking about a world that is created by and for women and what that might look like in all of its power and complexity. It has, of course, its own problems, but that is, I think, to Kate's question, the part of the book that I hope maybe resonates most in this particular time is what kind of world could we create if we can move away from the toxic patriarchy and recenter our communities around our children, around the next generation, and around care and community rather than everything else that we're seeing coming out in the news in the moment.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Abrea Armstrong, and I'm the author of Fairy Tales. And you all have to forgive me. I grew up in the Black church, and so I'm so used to call and response. So we'll do this one more time. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you. Like I said, traditions. We'll get more into it. So Fairy Tales is my debut novel, and I am the winner of the Ann Petrie Award as a Black American woman writer. First novel. I know you hear how all the things came together, and I feel so honored to be able to inherit such a legacy of strong writership and telling the truth of the Black experience. So Fairy Tales is the story of one of millions of Black American millennial women who think that they have it all, right? They've got the college degree, they've got the nice apartment, the nice car, passports, right? Everything that our Black parents told us that we had to do or else, right? All those things, except we realize that there's so much that we're missing in the sense of, for hundreds of years, we've been told who we were, we've been told what our homeland was, right? It's been dictated to us. It's been shown on CNN, Nat Geo, right? Those sorts of places. And so now there's so many of us who both have the means and the willingness to go and discover what that truth is for themselves. So the protagonist, Nana Freeman, goes over to Senegal per the unexpected invitation to one of our best friend's weddings. And there she is in between sort of tumbles in the bed and trips to the slave castle, really sort of digging into the Black diasporic experience and going in with that lens. And the impetus for this book for me was actually taking that trip for myself and discovering and realizing that there were so many people who were in this same place. And so whether you are a first generation or second generation from really any, or even third or fourth and beyond that, really from anywhere that's not America, and you have heard about your motherland and you've never been there, this novel is very much for you in that space of we can now go and find our truth for ourselves. And I love this sort of era that we're in of that. So when it comes to the key takeaway, and I think this really kind of gets to the heart of what it's like to be a Black woman in America in 2026, it's this idea of, I think for so long we've been told that we're not enough, right? That we need to go get the extra degree, which is why we are the most credentialed group in America. We need to go and find the husband. We need to go and check all the boxes. We need to get the 401k, right? We need to do all these things in order to meet. We need to straighten our hair, right? We need to do certain things in order to meet white standards. And this trip is really about trusting and acknowledging that you are enough as is. So this book is about those sort of internal voids that are able to be acknowledged when you're done filling them with the external things. So in this case, for her, for Nana, it's everything from sex, drugs, and hip hop, but like good drugs, y'all, not like naked lunch drugs. I just want to be very clear, like good drugs. And so there's this Bible verse. So I say that in the sense of this is not a holy book, but there is a lot of God in it. Like I said, there's still a lot of Hennessy and weed and all the kind of other things. But this Bible verse, 2 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 8, is really the one that sort of encapsulates the sentiment of, and God is able to make all grace abound towards you, that ye always having all sufficiency in all things may abound to every good. So what I hope that people take away from this novel is that you have everything that you need right now.
Hey, everybody. I'm really just honored to be with these writers today. I am a poet, and this is my first novel, Yellow. So some of the original version was in poems. It was supposed to be a hybrid, and it really turned into a piece of fiction. So it came very quickly. I had been working on a book for about 10 years, a novel, while I was writing poetry. And this one, well, COVID happened. And as we all know, may have been a fruitful writing time. We had time to write. So this book came rather quickly. So Yellow takes place it starts in 1973 Louisiana, when a young girl named Z discovers a yellow slime mold in her backyard. And so she has a coherence with that slime mold. She that's the speculative part of the book, in that they communicate, they have a bond. That bond, and I think that goes back to, a lot of, especially writers, especially artists, where you feel a sense, or I think young women, could be young men, but I'm saying in my experience, have a sense of a bigger thing more than yourself, that you are connected in many ways to nature and the world. So Z then has a tumultuous summer in which she is assaulted. And so after that assault, sexual assault, then that she's broken from Yellow, broken from the slime mold. So many of you may know about the intelligent slime mold. It was on Nova, and what we know about it is eyeless, it is brainless. However, it has 700 genders, and it can solve mazes. And so many say that it has possibly consciousness. So really, it's a metaphor for that bigger sense of the universe. And so once that assault happens, she spends the next really 40 years of her life trying to come back to that sense of that awakening that she had as a young woman, or young girl, actually. So it also is a genre bender. So I bring in what happened in 1973. And so in 1973, we had the Watergate hearings. So our first, in my lifetime, I guess, political, trauma that what's happening, what's the president doing? So the Watergate hearings happened in 1973. Also, Skylab went into space and had a malfunction in space. Also, we had the return of the Vietnam veterans. So I really was tracking those things that happened in 1973 and in the life of Z, who becomes a performance artist and visual artist. And really, I think it's it's about our egos and how our egos, in many ways, so I would say she's a broken person. She's a broken person until she can find her way back to that knowledge that she experienced with Yellow. I also tie in her younger brother, Clem. Clem becomes a homeless person. They live in New Orleans. He's a seeker as well as homeless. And so as a seeker, he really is still connected with Yellow. So that's the book. The takeaway that I hope that readers have is really the power and importance of art to help us almost reintegrate ourselves. And I would say it's about both a personal and our collective traumas. So sexual violence is a fact in many women's lives, and we know that the big ego in the White House, is not really taking account of these traumas that have been perpetrated on young women. So it's about really how art, forgiveness, a kind of forgiveness of self, and how we can really heal from those traumas. That's one thing that I'd like us to take away. The other one is to be just humble and open to the intelligences all around us. So marine life, right? The dolphins, the whales, those are intelligences that more and more we're tapping into. The wisdom of trees, more and more we're tapping into the wisdom of trees. And the Phasarum as well. The mycelium, it's the healing powers of mushrooms. So all of those things, I think, to just really be in wonder of how nature is there to get us back and remind us of a bigger oneness.
Hi, I'm Luke Goebel. I'm just going to grab my book. Sorry, I'm late. I apologize. It was a struggle getting here from DC. Thank you all for coming, and it's a great panel to be a part of. Thanks, everyone. I can't wait to read all your books when I have a moment. But so much of what you just said about Yellow resonates with this book as well. Kill Dick is my novel, April 14th, Red Hen Press. It was born out of also the kind of 2015 lead up to the election. My only brother, Carl, died of an oxy overdose 14 years ago. And I was sort of watching what was happening with the family that makes OxyContin and the way in which that hustle, using the FDA, the way that the FDA works, where you get to submit your own results, the way that someone from the FDA soon joined that family's organization after giving the endorsement, the way that, we know the story. I think everybody's fairly familiar, right, with the way that the family sold directly, pushed doctors to push that drug, right? And I was interested in sort of like, what are the systems that make these realities that we're all in? Like we're all in this state of shock and hand-wringing and moaning, most of us. But there's a way in which these things occur, right? And there's a certain way in which the macro and the micro are in communication, right? The way that families and systems of power put trauma upon one another at the higher realms, and how people with less access also are, victims to systems of dominance, systems of violence, systems of trauma. So the book is really a stratified portrait of LA and of our country, the people at the very top and the people at the very bottom, and kind of like, how do these systems occur? What is in conversation with Yellow is I've got a protagonist, Susie Vogelman, who really wants to be an artist. She goes to NYU, she gets hooked on Oxy, her roommate overdoses, she steals the pills. Her father is the primary attorney to Richard Sickler in the book. who makes the OxyContin. And she ends up bombed out in her backyard in Brentwood, a college dropout, hooked on pills, and starts to get drug in by her former professor, who's like a washed up 90s activist, who taught her to be a vegan, who taught her about Animal Liberation Front, who taught her about Earth First, who is beating that drum mostly out of his own feelings of white disempower male ego bullshit, but still he's gotten her interested in direct action. And then she sees the way in which her father and her family is intricately interwoven with her best friend's dad, who is Richard Sickler, who makes Oxy. And it goes from there. It ends with the decapitation of Richard Sickler. There's secret societies. It's a very 2016 Day of the Locusts world with secret societies. There's a church called the Church of White Illumination, which is very tongue-in-cheek. I was also interested when I was writing it because I was like, okay, how do systems of power like this perpetuate the types of violence that led to my brother, taking Oxy after surgery and becoming an addict? Why are there 500,000 plus dead? How does this kind of thing happen? And then also like any foolish person, I was looking at the internet in 2015 going what is this? And 16 going what is this Pizzagate? What is this QAnon? And started following that rabbit hole until it led to anti-Semitism. And I was like, all right, I'm out. But then I kept looking at it and going it really isn't a perfect move for Donald Trump, who in this book is called The Orange Candidate, to project what he's done onto others. And I was like, okay, so this is basically, there's a kernel of truth here with the Epstein, situation, subject, crimes, abuses, tortures, that was then wrapped in blood libel. And I don't want to go too far into that, but it's Steve Bannon and Roger Stone know exactly what they're doing. The whole lock her up thing, the whole anti-female Hillary Clinton campaign of, the Jews in Hollywood and Hillary Clinton are torturing children and drinking their blood is typical blood libel. And now we have a standing army on the streets, and we're looking at a fast track to fascism if it's not here already. So this book is examining that from a very personal. We've just got a rich girl on pills whose dad beats her and who's training her to, defend the family with an AR in their Brentwood estate. And then you've got, the people on the street in Skid Row, and you've got the people at the top in their little secret kinky party worlds. But just like what you were saying is so true about, I think, just the sentient existence of all living beings. And I am not a vegetarian or vegan at the moment. I have been before, but I kind of feel like when we start protecting animals, that will be the first step for our society to be oh, right, every life matters. We are a gentle species. And until we do that, as long as there's fur factories and mass, I'm getting a little bit off topic, but I loved what you had to say about, art and about the power of art. And this was really my book of being how do we use art to create direct action, because there is this feeling we're all so disempowered, and it sounds like everybody on the panel is using art as a weapon to fight back.
It's great hearing all of you, and it's interesting as an editor thinking about all of your books in terms of maybe red hens obsessions or something, but clearly the large wage inequities and large gap between the rich and the poor, it is in there somewhere. So just in case in the future you start looking up Abrea's book, I want to make sure that it's Fairy Tales, as in Ferry, Fairy Tales. Because it will be coming out, and I know you're going to be looking for her book. Red Hen publishes Percival Everett's poetry, and it's been fun working with him over the years. And as you know, he has a novel out, James, which you should all read. It has the easiest sum up of a novel. It's about Jim. It's from the point of view of Jim in Huckleberry Finn. But I've heard him over the years talk a lot about what makes a great book. And one of the things that he does is he has his students go into bookstores, and if they find any of his books in the African American section, they're supposed to reshelve them in fiction and literature. He's just kind of a little subversive like that. And I find this really kind of fun because part of his thing is that the job of a writer is to tell a good story, and that story will change people. And so I've done a lot of thinking about that because I'm always thinking about this subject of what this big takeaway is with a book. And so the next question I want to ask each of our writers is, we live in this world where I think most of us feel like there's so many things going wrong. And when we're working as a writer, we have character, we have plot, we have voice, we have setting. And given all of those tools that you have to work with, what do you feel you're doing as a writer in terms of the world in which we live? Are you artfully trying to put something in there that you feel is going to change something, or are you working, at least in this book that we're talking about, are you working on story? What is it that you dived in there to do? And because I think about this all the time when I'm editing a book, what was going on between this writer and the page, and maybe their Hennessy, hopefully not, hopefully just the writer and the page. So I'm going to start here with you, Amy.
Yeah, I think that, especially in the production of Yellow, I was actually just following where Yellow was taking me. I know that sounds very woo-woo, but it seemed like I was really just following its path. And so I know part of the question is this idea of broken people and broken communities. And I think that Z is broken by sexual assault, and she has to find her way back. But as a writer, being a mirror in some way, and I feel like that I was just mirroring what was happening in that culture that she was growing up in. So the 73, and it goes all the way to COVID times. And so one thing that happens in New Orleans is Hurricane Katrina. And so she has to search for her brother during the early part of the hurricane. And so I think what happened there was really looking at what happened before and after Hurricane Katrina and during. And so we know that so many homeless were unrecovered, even children unrecovered. And we also, we know that, the homeless, many people were left homeless after that. The hurricane left 400,000 homeless. 1.5 million residents were displaced. And I remember at the time in my life, I was teaching in Atlanta, and I remember almost half of my class was from New Orleans. And so we turned the writing into let's write about Hurricane Katrina. Let's try to get over this trauma. And just recently, in 2017, I experienced a hurricane event. So a tree crushed my house while I was in it. I ran through the house, had a little bit of a near-death experience in which I probably wouldn't have written Yellow if that hadn't happened. And so I had this, so the tree was a 90-foot tree that just sliced my little house in two. And I passed out for a moment, got up, And I thought, oh, well, this is how people die. But then my next thought was, oh my gosh, this could be an adventure. I may just die. And so I think that experience is part of why I wanted to, or was compelled to write about Hurricane Katrina. And I think that it's why I was compelled to write this book, is to really look at, well, what is consciousness and what is going to happen after we die. So anyway, I'm not sure if I answered your question, but that's where it went.
No, I like that because I think that having this story pull you forward is amazing. Yeah.
It's interesting what trauma triggers, to your point, which is very much the impetus of fairy tales, right? If there were no transatlantic slave trade, there would be no fairy tales. And also, just as a side note, you all, we have a monitor up here, and I've been sitting here looking at Amy's hair. I don't know how it looks on your cameras, but it looks incredible. So does my face. I'm like, you know what? I took time. Thank you. I took time this morning. We all did. And I'll also say this, I am very much, you know how there are method actors, right? I'm very much a method writer. So my protagonist likes what she likes, so I like what she likes on behalf of her, and so therefore I have some things written down. So if you see me looking down, it's because I have vices in life. So thank you for your patience in that regard. But above all else, and I call myself like a wordsmith because I started my writing journey as a poet, then a journalist, then a copywriter, and now a novelist. It's sort of this leg that I'm in. I also secretly make music too. I'm sure you'll hear about that someday. And as a writer, I think the number one duty of a writer is to observe. That's just fundamentally where I come from, especially being a journalist, is to observe. But with those observations, you're meant to make new connections, right? And get those new synapses firing in that regard. And so to Dr. Kate's point, Professor Evervold's point, is the idea of being an artist and not dictating to your audience what they're meant to take away from that piece. And so I very much sort of live in that space. And so what that looks like in fairy tales is Anana, the protagonist, going to Senegal with this very diasporic lens and just noting the journey, right? Literally, pieces of my journal entries that I wrote down, during my trip are sort of infused into this because it's literally just meant to be an observation. She's not making anything up, right? She's just letting it happen to her. All right, and writing it down. And so I feel very much the same way about being a writer. I feel like it's our job to create the work and to connect the dots between disparate ideas and things, right? Given our specific lens and life experience. However, it is the reader's job to then reflect on what those things mean to them. So I am not here to tell you what to take away from fairy tales. I hope that you read it, and whether you take away how to stretch out your foreplay or how to how to take a trip over to Senegal. It's really about you taking from the experience what you want, but it's my job to make sure that somebody captures it.
I love that. I'm wondering how many folks out there are struggling to write right now, if you're writers. Just raise my hand. Yeah, maybe that's why you're here today, to get some help in thinking through how to write. I wish I had answers for you. I have solidarity. I'm struggling to write right now because I'm thinking that what I write needs to respond in some way to what we're seeing in our world. And as writers, and as if some of us are also editors, we come to art sometimes thinking we need to be the voice of the people, right? For those who maybe can't speak for themselves. And that's a lot of pressure and weight to put on ourselves and on any given piece of writing. So I wasn't thinking about that too much when I was writing Bind Me Tighter Still. It's a very intimate and personal piece that does connect to the bigger issues in our world through less direct ways, so coming at it slant, like Emily Dickinson said. But I talk a lot about the elections as being these points of inflection for me. Right around the time of our last election, I felt that I wanted to write something, big that connected with specifically the rollback of women's rights and the patriarchy and all of these sort of big issues. And I'm really struggling. I'll say that I'm struggling with this novel I'm trying to write that engages with these things in a really direct way. And wondering what it means to tell a story right now and how to find the right vehicle to write something powerful that offers hope or at least some reflection of worth, to make meaning out of all of the meaningless or traumatic things that we're experiencing as humans right now. So a couple things I'm finding that maybe, I don't know if I would say that they're helping, but at least they're things I'm thinking about are how can I find that slant way in to the issues I truly care about? What are the stories first, story first, that can get at those concerns? And I need to pick a lane or a niche to write into, because right now we're being bombarded on all sides. Basically everything we care about, everything our families, our neighbors care about are being attacked, right? So if we're worried or if we're trying to engage with all of those things, our work becomes diffuse and the opposite of meaningful. So for me, I'm picking the lane of women's rights, specifically sexual abuse. I'm thinking a lot about the Epstein files right now and how I can write into that in a way that feels powerful. So picking a lane and trying again to take that weight off of my shoulders and off of the work, and to be thinking, to Kate's point, how I can tell a story above everything else. And then just being in community as well. And this is sort of moving away from the specificity of the question about stories, but being in spaces like this is so important, and it's finding resistance in spaces of community where we come together to celebrate art or whatever other communities we're finding to be part of, and to lift each other up and to have these conversations. Sometimes we might feel guilty about being in spaces where we find joy, or we're not directly engaging with the big issues in our world, but there is resistance in joy, and there's resistance in creation and in being together. So I'm really thrilled to be here and grateful for all of you for being in this space.
Thanks. I'm always like, I'm going to speak very slowly and be present, and then like I get a million ideas through my little rat brain. But I guess the question was like, how do we work with story to spread a message, I think. And I was very aware of this with this book, and like that it's a sunshine noir, Shaggy Dog kind of like, plot-driven thriller, which I wanted to basically, I failed writing this book for 10 years, and then it worked. But I wrote it 4 times. And I think like the first version was just like, how do I speak about all these ills from, what the oil companies have done to us, to the microplastics in us, to the animal suffering, to the unhoused, homeless, to the addicted. It's just like, the immensity of the corruption of the system and how well it's perfected capitalism is something that is staggering. So I was like, the first one was like sort of like everyone's always like, all these rants. And like now there are no rants. So I think I had to kind of get the issues in first, and then I had to do it again and again, and then I finally figured out the story, and then I had to put the story first, which is something that I've written a couple of films. I am married to a very successful author, and I was like just studying her, going like, how do you do that? Like, how do you make something that people will read? So in essence, I was like, how do you get people to care about homeless people and the addicted, stratification, and social ills? And I was like, well, you killed the homeless people and you cut them up and the addicted in bad motels across LA, because people are addicted to violence and thrillers. And it's a metaphor for the system that kills these people that no one cares about, right? I grew up in a small town of 2,500 in Ohio, where I was fourth generation. And the first time I went to New York City at like 6, where my dad was from Long Island, I was so upset when I saw homeless people. And I was like, I wasn't a very stable child even. And I was like to my dad, I was like, what are we going to, we have to save these people. I was like frantic. I was like, we have to save them. And he was like, because like my parents met in a Christian cult. My town was, all Catholic. And I was like, this is what we were told to do. Remember? And my dad was just like, you can't save them. You can't help them. I was like, what do you, I was like frantic. I was like, what do you mean? And then, 20 years later, I've been in 5 rehabs, 2 mental institutions, 5 jails, and this is like my actual life. And I'm like, had more opportunity than the people who when they get there, they can't get back up. I had people to help me get back up. But I was like, I'm sober now. My brother died of drugs. It was sort of like, just like, what can I do to speak? And then I thought, well, the most dangerous thing I could do was write a book like this about this very powerful family and try to get like a Big 5 press to take it, which of course they didn't. But Dr. Gale did and took a big chance on this book. And I think we need acts of resistance. And I am not for, I like look at Luigi Mangione and I'm like, that's so sad. Where he is, what his life story is, what this guy who he killed life story is. But I understand the rage and I understand why people are so upset and why people favor him. And so I wrote a book about a 20-year-old female Luigi Mangione who gets, away with it maybe depending on what your take is on the book at the end. But yeah, I just feel like, there is a certain like politeness to our society right now that if we're going to resist, we're going to have to drop a little bit of that maybe.
I do have a few more questions, but I just wanted to get a show of hands of whether any of you had questions that you were hoping to ask. So could I get hands? Maybe nobody has any questions. Oh, okay. So it looks like we have a couple. Okay. So I'm going to do one more question, and then I'll see what questions you all have. One of the things I wanted to see if you all could address is that I think about when I'm editing a book or when I'm reading a book is, George Orwell didn't feel a need for a book to move toward the light in any way. Certainly 1984 does not. I don't think Margaret Atwood feels much of a need for a book to move toward the light. But for the most part, when we're reading a novel, Lauren Groff or Claire Massou or something, we like to come to some place where it's like, oh, this is a good ending. And I think when we say a good ending, things feel resolved in some way. It feels like there's an ending that, well, it doesn't have to be a happy ending or a light ending, but things kind of feel resolved. So I'm curious for each of you, as you were wrapping up your book at the end, you don't have to say what the ending was, but did you feel, given the somewhat dystopian elements that you were dealing with, did you feel like what you wanted to do at the end was punch it, Orwell style, or did you feel like you wanted to kind of bring it together for your audience? What kind of a feeling were you hoping for? And can you tell us a little bit about that? Luke, let's start with you.
Thank you. It was important to me throughout the entire book to have it be light and to have there be beauty. It sounds pretty like dark maybe, but it's actually like a very like ornate and beautiful and sun-drenched, and it's like, a love letter as well as a complaint to LA and to America. I mean, there's like, our protagonist is in love with flowers, she's in love with art, she's in love with beauty. As jaded as she is, there's just like the book is dripping in the gorgeousness of life and in the execution of the prose being like classically beautiful, hopefully. if I've succeeded at all. So I think that, like, I don't want to have a bad time. Like, they're already giving us a bad time. I want to have a good time. I want to bring light to the world, even if we're shining, a mirror on, or, putting a mirror in front of the darkness. So, I mean, just the fact that we all exist is outstandingly, like, what are the data points of, like, the likelihood of this all happening? And we're all just, like, here one time that we know of, and it's pretty great, as hard as it is. So, I mean, I definitely wanted the book to be a love letter to life. I mean, why else try to capture existence? You don't go to a museum to see the ugliest things preserved in timelessness. You go to museums to see people transform the matter of life into beauty. I guess that's it.
That was beautifully said. Yeah. How to follow that? I guess I don't feel the need to end happily, or with hope, or hopefully with beauty. It's like there can be beauty in despair as well. But when I think about ending a story, at least for me, I like to think about endings that sort of haunt a reader and keep them thinking about where the story might go from there, or is there any way forward for these characters, at least in Bind Me Tighter Still, which is very much based on the structure of the Little Mermaid fairy tale, but does not follow the same plot points. But it does engage with the end of the Little Mermaid story, the original story, Hans Christian Andersen's version, that ends in sacrifice. And so thinking about what is important to the characters and how a sacrifice could be meaningful even as it's devastating is something that I was thinking a lot about for this book. And I think there is a little glimmer of hope maybe at the end of Bind Me Tighter Still. But the book I'm working on now that I shared I'm struggling with ends very much without hope. And maybe that's in part why I'm struggling to write it. I'm not sure. Because right now I'm constantly sort of feeling like I'm moving back and forth between hope and hopelessness. And I'm wondering how that will play out both for me and in my book, but how that will play out for all of us as creatives, and thinking maybe 5-10 years from now when we look back at this period and the stories that come out of this period, I'm kind of wondering and curious to see whether we'll find some maybe new form or stories that end in a different way that we haven't created yet. So I feel like we're in it. We're in this moment. So I think once we're out of it, hopefully, God willing, we'll move out of it, to look back and see how have we created meaning out of this moment, and how do we end our stories when they feel very much as if we have no idea where they're going to go. Right? I don't know if that was particularly eloquent, but I'm sharing my vulnerable struggle as a writer with you, and maybe that resonates too.
No, thank you for sharing that vulnerability. We appreciate that. And I do think that's also very much what writing is for that space. So if I may, like, tie a few themes together. Yes, we live in perilous times. I'm so grateful I have 2 passports right now. That's what I'll say. I am so grateful I have 2 passports. Yesterday was Ghana's Independence Day. That's where my second citizenship is, and that's where this suit is from. God bless our homeland, Ghana. But to that point, this is probably my main thing. America is a country, or is a country founded in error. The values and principles that were used to establish this country were not thinking about people who look like me. I actually literally just got into an argument with one of my men. We were talking about the Transcendentalist, and he was like, but Thoreau is an abolitionist. And I was like, it's hard for me to believe, though, that if Thoreau came back and there were a book club of all Black women, that Thoreau wouldn't be a little upset about it. Like, I don't know how to feel about that one. And so to me, what that means is that regardless of who the president is, right? So regardless of whether we've got Trumpito in DC, whether we've got J. Edgar Hoover in the FBI, whether we got Cecil Rhodes in South Africa, right? And Rhodey, it doesn't matter. the struggle of being a Black woman persists, period, regardless of time. And so I appreciate that this story is a bit timeless, right, in that sort of way, recognizing the struggle, but it's timely in that it adds a new nuance that couldn't have existed before. Before, it was only women like Nina Simone or Maya Angelou that could go to these places, but now it's people like me, people like us, right? And so I recognize that, like everything, we are in a cycle. And I also recognize that we are probably closer to that midnight than anything. But, and this is where the sort of, I told y'all I smoke a lot of weed. This is where this kind of comes into play here of winter solstice. If you think about something like winter solstice, you can look at it two ways, right? You can look at it as like the death, or you can look at it as a birth, right? This idea of every day after winter solstice, you're getting that much little extra bit of light. And so what I appreciate about story and writing is that you can build that in. And so why you see, for example, this phrase here, bad girls read good books, the story is actually one of my other men. I wrote a description in a book to him many, many years ago, book Harlem is Nowhere, good read. And I written it, and a few months ago, something spoke to me and was like, oh, you should ask Rashad what you put in that book. And so I texted and I was like, hey, like, what did I inscribe? And he was like, bad girls read good books. And I said to myself, that is exactly the moral here, because it's not about what you're being told it's about you seeing the truth in that, right? You deciding for yourself what that truth is. And so sure, a bad girl could be described as somebody who drinks Hennessy on a Tuesday, right? Who shows up late to work, right? All those sorts of things, has a whole roster of men. But a bad girl is also, I told another one of mine, I said, I would rather be a bitch than a pushover any day. Any day. I don't know about y'all. Okay. I would rather be a bad girl who decides for myself what my truth is and what that light is. And so for my book, what I made sure to do, small spoiler alert, but this could look a many ways, so still leaving some mystery here. I made sure to put a happy ending into this, right? Because for so long, we have never had a happy ending. I remember watching the movie The Woman King, and I'm like, oh my God, here we go again. I'm like, and even with Ann Petrie's The Street, sometimes I struggled to read it in full transparency, because I'm like, man, what's gonna happen to Ludi this chapter? Like, is this gonna be the chapter where she gets raped by her neighbor? Like, or is it gonna be tomorrow, right? I wanted to have that wasn't the thing anymore, right? I wanted to have a book where it's like the next day is going to be another triumph, right? Maybe a trial, but also a triumph on the backside. And so I see this space, this creative space, as us having the opportunity to create the world that I hope to live in. And so that's, to me, how I see light and truth and writing coming together.
Yeah, I love all these answers. They're amazing. At the end of my book, I believe, yes, I'm moving towards the light. So Z, after a lot of loss, after a lot of disappointments in her art, and carrying a lot of baggage, as we all do, and carrying a lot of grudges, comes to a place where she can transcend her own ego, and through her art, through the art that she creates. And I don't want to give away the ending too much, but I was excited by Eleanor Wilner's and Ilya Kaminsky's discussion of the lyrical we. How many of you went to that? Few, yes. It was absolutely beautiful and interesting to hear them talk about the lyrical we, which is more of a collective voice that rises above the political we, and is transpersonal. And so let's go of the ego in many ways. And so and the idea of Ilya Kaminsky talked about getting rid of that cult of personality that we are burdened with even as writers. And so I resonated with that, just because finally in the last chapters of the book, I did write a chapter in we, using the word we over and over. And so I felt, oh, okay, so I didn't know that was happening, but I really wanted that choral voice of we are all a part of each other. And almost every panel I've been to, I've heard people, the panelists are talking about we are interconnected. And if we have to remember that, and we have to have the compassion and wisdom to understand each other and revel in the beauty of each other's stories as much as possible. So anyway, I loved the idea of that lyrical we.
Thank you all so much for those answers. Thank you. When you were saying that, it reminded me that when we were first founding the Ann Petrie Prize, Maurice Carlos Ruffin was working with us, and we were talking about the name of it. And we were going over, he didn't want it to be like the Toni Morrison or James Baldwin. He wanted it to be someone who was lesser known. And one of the writers that came up was I think I brought up that one of my favorite writers was Nella Larson. And then there was some discussion of the fact that, well, her characters, the black women end up either miserable or pushed out of windows. And I said, I love her writing. And then we ended up with Ann Petrie. But yes, I do know what you mean. So I wanted we can circle back to a final question for the group here, but I wanted to see, it seemed like a couple people had questions, and I can repeat your question out loud. So it seemed, yes.
My question has to do with speak to the leader demand for dystopian fiction. I was thinking of, I have this idea for a novel, and as things start to get darker reality, I'm thinking is, do people want to read that? Will they want to read that in years?
So the question is, what do we think the reader demand is in terms of dystopian fiction? So we'll see what our writers up here think. You guys have been out and discussing this and maybe working towards this. Luke, you want to jump in?
Thank you for your question. I'm just laughing because I just took over half of a publishing company called Tyrant Books that I helped assist a guy named Giancarlo Di Trapano in creating. He died of a heroin overdose. And I have absolutely no idea what readers want. I have no idea how to make money. I have no idea how to run a company. I mean, I just go back, I guess, to like theory, like Aristotle, like poetry is greater than history because poetry contains everything that could ever happen. History only contains that which has happened. Catharsis was, a big phrase of his, and I think people want catharsis. I think we're all feeling like, what if this goes really badly and we don't survive? Or, other variations of that, or at least that's how I feel. Maybe it's trauma response, I don't know, but I'm just like, every time something happens, like COVID, I'm like, is the National Guard going to block the exits? Are we going to be in riots? Are we going to, you know what I mean? Some of that did happen, but not as bad as I was afraid. I thought we were all going to die. And, now with the current situation, I'm like, are we in trouble again? Are we going to get, is it like you're saying, like, and I like that term. Did you say passport black? Is that what you said? Experience? I don't remember. There's been so many great phrases, but, yeah, I mean, it's just like, are we going to be okay? And why do we feel this powerless? And, I think people want catharsis. I think people want to be like, I'm not the only person who's freaking out inside while I pretend like I'm just okay with whatever, bitching and moaning, but not like actually freaking out. I'm a little bit actually freaking out. I think it'd probably be a good idea for us all to like buy land together, protect one another, get some things to defend ourselves, find like close-knit communities off of the beaten path. But it doesn't seem like we ever pull that together because it's so hard just to have like one person in your life. But yeah, I think people want catharsis. I think people want to at least be acknowledged that, I guess like that's the one good thing about this whole Epstein thing coming to light is like we feel a little bit less gaslit. Like, oh yeah, no, there is something going on, like we're starting to have the veil lifted a little bit, that there are circles of insane power and wealth that are conspiring and doing things that are affecting our lives. So I think people want to read things that make them feel that they're seen and that they're not the only one. But then I think they also want something that makes them feel like there's magic to life and we're going to be okay. And I think we are. I mean, just personally, I'm like, think about how many times throughout history it's always the darkest moment. Like I think the game is rigged in our favor, which is not to say that there's not a ton of suffering and death and loss, and it's abhorrent, and we're all sitting with that, and it's like making us insane. It's horrible. And there are people who are in charge that are orchestrating these things, but it's also like, I just think we're going to be all right.
If I may. So first, I just want to say, for me as a Black woman in America, dystopian fiction is my reality. Like, to me, it's like not 1984. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's this, right? It's being under a tyrannical regime, right? Fascist regime. And so, to Luke's point, I think that people do want to be seen, right, and be acknowledged and recognized that they're in this space, in a shared space. And so, even as I've been passing these out, what I've been asking people is, are you a bad girl who reads good books? So meaning, like, do you identify, right? Do you see yourself, right, in this message? And also, if you are a bad girl who reads good books and would like one, please come see me afterwards. They are a giveaway for a moment. And so in short, I really do think that as long as people are seeing themselves, like, that's what they want. And whether that looks like dystopian in terms of just 2026 America, or Handmaid's Tale, right? All of it to me is dystopian, and we all need to be seen in that.
Yeah, no, that's great. I'll just add that a few things. One is to write what you're compelled to write without worrying too much about the market, because it's so unpredictable, and we don't know, as we've heard, what readers specifically are looking for. So trying to write for a reader who we don't really know what they want is a bit of a sort of a losing game, I think. So to write what you want to write, and then those who want to read what you have to say will be drawn to it. And the other thing is, I am hearing that a lot too, that publishers are not looking for types of books that engage with what we're seeing in our world. That might be true in some cases, but I'm finding that especially independent presses are looking specifically for books that are risk-taking, that are engaging with difficult subjects that don't, and happily, that get very dark. And Red Hen Press is one of those presses that is out there doing that work. So if you're thinking about where to place a book like that, I would say look to the indies, look to the presses who are taking those risks.
Yeah, I just want to point out, I guess, because I was talking about hurricanes, and we haven't really talked about climate change, and we haven't talked about, well, is it dystopian or is it just our reality? And so, we haven't, I'm more all this political dynamics. We're also seeing that our environment is species are dying, and our world is eroding because of climate change. So it's hard to see the positives, and it's hard to say, okay, this is reality. It's not just dystopian, and we have to pay attention. So anyway, I feel like, having gone through my hurricane, I understood that I felt this understanding that more and more people are going to have to deal with environmental, natural disasters personally. More and more people are going to be personally affected, and that's just the truth. That's just our reality.
Can I just say one other thing? I think you have to fall in love with the character. Like, there's so much of this, like, I almost feel like remiss that I've spoken so much about the idea of the book and where it came from, but like, it's really about the character. If you love your character, you can put them in any world, right? It's like, you just really got to love who you're with.
Yeah, the the part of dystopian fiction that has to do with climate change is called cli-fi, which sounds very clitoral to me. But people will send me books that they'll say this is cli-fi, and I think that's a whole category. Interestingly, I really like what you were saying, though. That I mean, you're going to write well the book that is closest to your heart. Because I come from poverty and, I've lived in my car and everything, I always can tell when someone who comes from money is trying to write about poverty. It just like grates on me because I'll think, okay, but this person is also drinking Earl Grey tea. Where would they get it from? They wouldn't be. They'd be drinking Lipton, and they would have used the tea bag many times. Like, I noticed these things. So, I mean, just like lean into your own authentic life when you're writing, I think is a good thing. However, going back to your original question, if you were talking with like just a big agent in New York or someone in Big Five in New York and asking them like, what's selling well right now, they would be saying, certainly dystopian fiction would be way up there. Romantasy, I'm assuming you all know, fantasy in general. These are in the top categories right now, romantasy and romance in general, and dystopian fiction are in the top ones. And so, Red Hen Press has, except for me, everyone is a millennial or Gen Z, and that's what they like reading. They don't read romance or romantasy, but they do like fantasy and spec fiction and dystopian fiction. And so we have been leaning into a lot more of that, all of the dark that is America. Somebody else had a question. Yes.
So you mentioned about characters, and the stories in dystopian fiction are really big, and they are like their own. How do you go about writing characters, I would say, effectively, accurately, on tone as part of that? Where do you come up with self observation, and what do you do to place them into those stories so they don't lose their character, their personhood as part of that story?
So the question is, how do you build great characters inside a dystopian book? For any of you who have read, obviously a lot of you have read *Handmaid's Tale*, but Margaret Atwood followed that up by a trilogy, and one of them that I always think about that didn't have great characters was *Orcs and Crake*. So it had this great world building, but who were those characters? Not memorable at all. Whereas Offred, obviously quite memorable in her little red hood, played by a Scientologist. So character building is very important. We follow characters. I remember Uriah Heep from when I was in college, little redheaded dweeb. And so, characters are everything. So let's start with you, Amy.
Well, I'm coming from being a poet, so this was the first time that I felt like this was not me. It was refreshing. That's all I could say. I think the characters do just have to have and I love the idea that it was not me. I love the idea that she was going to have different ways of reacting in the world and different, but also there was a heart there. But she, I guess that's the only way I would say, is that make the character authentic and make sure the character, there's going to be parts of your life and parts of what you've experienced that will be there. But if it's a distinct character, for me, that was the most useful thing. I talked about that novel that I was taking 10 years to write. Too much me. And so it was just super refreshing just to have that independent character.
I agree with having a strong sense of, like, I say self, but that also being evolving, right? I think that sense of self at the beginning versus the sense of self in the middle and the end are two or three rather, different things. And so even I think we see this kind of happen a lot, even on things like YouTube. You'll see something like ASAP Rocky goes and as a substitute teacher, or Gigi Hadid goes as a substitute teacher, and you watch them be themselves in these very different environments, right? And so you're still getting those same sort of isms, as we like to call them in Black culture, the same sort of isms from people. And so from what I did was sort of base them on archetypes. So there were certain points in the book where I was like, okay, this is getting too serious. I need some comic relief. And I knew that girl, even, you know what I'm saying? We all know that one friend that we have that always will be that'll break the ice, And so using archetypes as like the anchor, right? And then also building their sense of self, which for me was a lot of like my friends, right? Just, and the people I interact with, the people I've seen on TV, my aunts, my relatives, factoring all those truths in to build this sort of artificial but yet grounded in truth character. That's the authenticity that Amy was talking about. And putting them in these situations and letting them react as themselves, right? So sure, Anana, the protagonist, was in a different country, but she's still in the club. So she's still going to drink Hennessy, right? She's still going to find a man to twerk on, right? She's still going to do all these things, even though she's still in the same environment, She might have just gone to the slave house, but afterward to come down, she's still going to go find a joint, right? So it's the idea of building that authenticity, that sense of self and letting that come out in all of those moments.
I think there's also a danger in writing dystopian stories or stories that engage with these big themes, because a character could serve as the author's mouthpiece and just sort of be like a puppet for what we want to say about the world. And that is why sometimes the character can get lost in these vast worlds that we're creating. So thinking in part, when trying to create a character who feels authentic and like a real person or creature in a dystopian world or any world, I think about what that character wants and what's at stake for them. Because more or less, I mean, it's not always the case, but most of the time a character really wants something and or needs something. And if they don't achieve what they want or need, the stakes are going to be really high for them, right? So it's that piece that kind of elevates a character in any world, really, whether they're in their own home in the suburbs or in a castle in a romantasy or some dystopian world, is that they have some deep need that the story is pushing back against, and that's what creates the tension for that character and moves the story forward. So I think if your character's getting lost in a vast world, think about what they need and want and what's at stake for them.
I mean, so much of it is just God, right? Like God, or whatever you want to call it, like is going to speak to you and deliver a character to you that you're going to be obsessed with. And for me, it was a long journey. And for like a couple of years, it was just her in her backyard. I don't even think she was stoned yet on Oxy. I think she was just laying there, and I just like wanted to capture this certain type of thought and like presence of a character. I met this young woman before I met my wife. I was living in this 31-foot RV that was a 1988 Breaking Bad bounder. I had illegally parked it in Reese Witherspoon's gated community in Brentwood. I met this girl, and she wanted to be an artist, and came from wealth. And I was like, I am interested in Susie Vogelman. I don't remember if her name was Susie in real life. I'm so sorry. But I just became obsessed with that character. And then everything from there is like, a lot of it's about theory, you know? It's like I read a lot of, one of the best things that ever happened to me was being a professor for 10 years and being told that I was going to teach like the history of Western thought or whatever you want to call it. And I just like had to teach myself because I'd never read any of the shit. And, you know, it's like you want a character who's smarter than you, if possible, or at least, you know, very intelligent, I think. We want to be around somebody who's smart. You look at like Shakespeare, you want something that represents the whole. You want to put them in worlds and, you know, in systems where they have access to some kind of control or some kind of agency, or they find a way to get that. I think some of it's from like writing film. You know, characters have to have a strong desire that we understand and identify with immediately. But you can't like, I don't think that there's, I don't know, like I can't like try to game, like what somebody was saying was like, it took 10 years to write the book. If you're thinking like, what's the market going to do? Jesus, I mean, it's going to take a while. It's going to change before you get there, right? It's like you can't try to game the system of writing a good book. It has to be something that you're like really in love with and compelled with and excited to go to every single day, even at the moments where you're like, I suck, I'm the worst, I hate myself, I'm never going to get it, I am, you know, like, you know, and then try doing that with like Otessa Moshfegh in the same house. And it's like, you know, that was my life. And I was like, I think it's just about like, you know, who do you love in this character? Why do you love this character? And what world and what intelligence do you want to give them so that they can actually have an effect, right? On the reader, on their world, on their own lives. And then the other thing is like, just don't give up if you love it, because the great thing about writing a book is you're teaching yourself something. Your higher self is like, you know, you're learning through the process of creating art. And when it actually works, you've made the development and the growth that the project compelled you to enter in the first place. Like you're drawn to a work because you're trying to work something out within yourself. I think, at least for me, like I write books because I need to work something out that's bothering me or that it's exciting me. And when you finally get it, you're like, oh my God, I made the leap. I'm ready for the next thing.
So all of writing, all of story, and hopefully being here today is an adventure. Thank you all so much for coming. Look forward to seeing you.